we're going to continue to focus on history a little bit. We're gonna jump around all the time. And so today we're going to backtrack a few decades from last week in the Cold War. We're going to go before that and look at the Great Depression in the 1930s and kind of look at the Great Depression, but also how it started, which was the stock market crash of 1929. It's good to be a little bit aware of, for life and for the GED test purposes, it's good to be a little bit aware of economics and how things work. And if they talk about stocks, I mean, you don't have to be an expert, but it's good to have a working knowledge of some of these things. And I find, like most things in history, I find the Great Depression kind of interesting and how people's lives changed. And I think what I find the value in studying history is the ability to compare today with the past. We think this is a problem, that's a problem, this is a big deal, that's a big deal. But so often something similar has happened in the past, and so it's interesting to see what those past things are like. Certainly what can we learn from them as a society or as individuals. So we did have, the economic recession in 2008, which was a big deal at the time. A lot of people's investments went down. I mean, I had some friends, older friends, who were ready to retire and then couldn't retire because their decades of investments for retirement were like suddenly overnight worth a quarter of what they were in 2008. So they were like gearing up to retire and step away from jobs, and then this couple couldn't. So similar things, much worse things happened with the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression. So big picture, the Great Depression is kind of the 1930s as a whole, 1930s. What happens in world history, American history, right after the Great Depression? What's the big event that happens in 1940, early 40s?
World War II.
World War II. So World War II is like 1940 to 44. So the Great Depression is right before World War II. And we're actually going to watch a video, a short little video. I think I should be able to make it work. And it's going to mention at the end, I think, the kind of what brought the Great Depression to a close, what boosted the country out of the Great Depression was the fighting and the war of World War II, because wars are actually very good for the economy, crazy enough. So we're going to start with a little video, 5-minute video, and then we're going to do a little bit of reading. We'll look at this chart here. So let me see if I can get this video up. There it is. Okay, I'm going to unplug my headphones because I think that's the only way for this to work. And then I'll play it for a second and then pause it and check that you can hear it. Okay, hold on. Okay, let me turn it all the way up. Okay, can you guys hear that?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I can hear you, but not video.
Okay, hold on a second. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I
Just
can
a little
hear
bit.
it, yeah, but not very loud.
Okay, well, I've got it turned up 100% on my side of things. So let me try one other thing here. I don't know. Okay, well, if you can turn up your volume as high as you can, I'll turn up, I've got my volume turned up as high as I can. So we'll watch this. It's 5 minutes, and then it's going to cover quite a lot of what we're going to talk about, and then we'll do the reading. Okay. Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but the video was really like I could hardly hear anything in
Oh,
this
okay.
video. Could you please just share the link with us and we can watch it later?
Yes, yeah, I definitely will. I will.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So that well, I mean, we're gonna read over all that information as well. So the Great Depression, it's interesting. I was to get ready for today. I was watching several different videos, and some better than others. And um, one video was saying that people always want to like name the cause of the Great Depression. It wasn't just the stock market crash. Um, Only about 10% of Americans at that time owned stock in the stock market. Today, I think it's about half. About half of America has money invested in the stock market. So the stock market is a bigger deal today, you know, for more people than it was back then. But uh, so back then, only about 10% had money in the stock market. So 90% of Americans didn't have money invested in the stock market. And yet the whole economy is so complex that when the stock market crashes, even though you don't have your money in it, it affects you because there's so many interchangeable or interconnected um, parts to the economy. So let's start this reading, and we can talk as we go. But first, let's look at the chart. It's always good to be comfortable with charts and figures and diagrams and maps and things for that GED test. There's always a lot of graphics, charts, maps, things like that. So this is a chart. This is the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Actually, I think um, the first paragraph describes it. So actually, let me read it. On October 24th, 1929, a day that came to be known as Black Thursday, investors began to sell their stocks at an alarming rate. By October 29th, the Great Crash was underway, and by November 17th, over $30 billion had disappeared from the U.S. economy. In the chart here, the horizontal axis represents the years 1921 to 1940, and the vertical axis represents the Dow Jones Industrial Average. That's something that you probably hear on the news today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average. That's just an average, a measurement, kind of a generic measurement of the stock market health. So there's thousands and thousands and thousands of different stocks you can invest in, and I don't know all the details exactly, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average is a good measurement of the health of the stock market. So you see 1929 to 1930, follow that up, and at the right hand side of 1929, figure October, there's this steep downhill from about over 35,000 or 350 dollars or points. I'm not an expert here on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, but 350 down here jumps to 200. So almost half, cuts in half almost literally overnight or in a week. And then it jumps back up to the beginning of 1930 to 300, and then it climbs down it hits its low point by the middle of 1932. So this would, you could certainly expect a question about this. It might say, when was the sharpest decrease in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, or when did the Dow Jones Industrial Average hit its lowest point in the Great Depression? So that would be 1932. When did it have its sharpest decrease? You'd say late 1929. Sure enough, October 1929. Okay, so let's just take a few turns reading. I got really two sections here. One section, this first page, discusses the stock market crash. We can understand that a little bit. And then the second, pages 2 and 3, a couple more paragraphs, discuss the Great Depression itself and how the stock market crash led to the Great Depression and what was that really like. Amy Lynn, could you read paragraph 2?
Sure.
Okay.
What caused stock prices to fall? Although the workings of the New York Stock Exchange can be quite complex, one simple principle governs the price of stock. When investors believe a stock is a good value, they are willing to pay more for a share and its value rises. When traders believe the value of a security will fall, they cannot sell it as high of a price. If all investors try to sell their shares at once and no one is willing to buy, the value of the market shrinks.
Okay, thank you. So that's the stock market in a nutshell. Everybody's trying to make money. The idea is you buy a share, or however many shares of stocks at a low price, and the value goes up, and you sell it at a high price. Thus, you're making money. If you buy stock today and then throughout, if a year from now the stock price falls, let's say you buy 100 shares of stock for $10 a piece. What would that be? $1,000. If the value of that stock goes from $10 to $9, then the value of your stock that you're holding goes from $1,000 to $900. If it goes, they said there's investors that could get no one willing to buy. That means it has literally no value because no one is willing to buy your stock. The stock market's kind of mysterious how it works. Everybody's in it to make money. And the idea is that you're selling your stock when it's a high. You want your stock always to be going up. And so what was happening was, as that video sort of explained, well, it didn't explain super in depth, but people were investing as if prices are always going to go up. Banks were doing some kind of shady things that weren't very responsible with their customers' money. Everybody was borrowing money in order to buy stocks, which is risky because then you don't really own the stocks. It's a little bit risky. You're taking a big risk. And it was good while it lasted, but then as soon as things start to tip over the edge and go down, it created massive problems. People were borrowing money in order to buy stock. Again, which is great as long as if you can promise me that the price of stock is always going to go up. But it didn't. So oh, Jasmine, thank you for logging in. I didn't see when you did log in here, but we're talking about the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression. So Jasmine, thanks for logging in. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I can.
Good. Okay, super. Carla, could you read paragraph 2? No, wait a second. Paragraph 3.
Yes, on October 24, 1929, Black Thursday, this massive sell-a-thon began. By the late afternoon, wealthy financiers like J.P. Morgan pulled their sources and began to buy stocks in the hopes of reversing the trend.
Okay, so wealthy financiers, this is just super wealthy investment people. They could see even just within that day, the stock market was crashing, and so they started to just buy because they're so rich. They started to just buy massive amounts of stock to try to save the market because everybody was selling, and so the prices are going down, 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 and J.P. Morgan and other wealthy financiers, you know, the millionaires and billionaires of the time. Even though they would be buying worthless, you know, junk stock that nobody wants, they wanted to buy it up in order to save the whole system. And you could say, well, wasn't that nice of them? But they're also trying to save their own fortunes. Okay, Carla, why don't you read paragraph 4 as well?
Okay. It says, but the bottom fell out of the market on Tuesday, October 29. A record 16 million shares were exchanged for smaller and smaller values as the day progressed. For some stocks, no buyers could be found at any price. By the end of the day, panic had erupted, and the next few weeks continued the downward spiral. In a matter of 10 short weeks, the value of the entire market was cut in half. Suicide and despair swept the investing classes of America.
Okay, so the investing classes, like the class of people that are investment, the bankers and the investment people. And yeah, there's stories of, you know, that day, October 29th, a high number of suicides among those bankers and the investment people. Interesting stories. But yeah, October 24th was Black Thursday. Tuesday, October 29th that's kind of the date that people identify with the stock market crash. But it continues for weeks. In the next couple of weeks or 10 days, the value of all stocks as a whole was cut in half, which is a huge, huge deal. Okay, so that kind of explains the stock market crash 1929, which kicks off. Well, the one video that I watched said it didn't. The Great Depression wasn't caused by the stock market crash, but it did start at the stock market crash. It was caused by a lot of different things, like, you know, we live in a complex world. The stock market crash was a big part of it. The way the banks were lending money so easily. A lot of people were investing in risky things. The stock market is risky. The banks were borrowing. You know, you put your money in the bank, right? The bank or the bank could loan. Maybe you take out a loan. Let's say this: you take out a loan to do something, maybe to buy stock. The money lends you. Let's say you take out a loan for $10,000. The bank is going to lend you $10,000, but you have to pay it back eventually with interest. So they're going to charge you. You have to pay back your $10,000 plus a little bit of interest. That's how they make their money. So on a $10,000 loan, let's say there's a 10% interest. That's $1,000. You would end up paying back the bank $11,000, right? So that's how the banks make their money. They're not only giving out money to people very easily to give out loans, but they're borrowing, they're taking the money that they're giving out at this time is the money that people are putting in the bank, like your family's savings account or checking account, savings account. The bank is turning around and giving your money to somebody else. So now what happens is, when somebody comes to the bank and says, well, I have a savings account here, I'd like to cash it out, I'd like to take that money home with me, the bank doesn't have that money. And so, that's a problem. People are going to the bank. Now the stock market's crashing. People are worried. People are scared. They'd rather have their money sitting at home with them in cash than sitting in a bank. So they go to the bank. They say, I'd like my money, please. I have $5,000 in a savings account. And the bank says, well, we can't give you that money today. That's a problem. That's called a run on the bank. When people go to the bank and try to get their money out, a lot of people, it's called a bank run or a run on the banks. And that was happening. People were going to the bank and the bank was saying, we don't have $5,000 to give you. We don't have your money. So that's a real problem. Okay, so let's look at the Great Depression. Nadia, could you read paragraph 5?
Just a moment, please. When the stock market crashed on October 29, 1929, few Americans believed that a decade-long depression was underway. After all, only 4 million Americans had money invested on Wall Street. 90% of American households owned precisely zero shares of stock. President Herbert Hoover quickly addressed the nation, professing his faith in the soundness of the American economy. But soothing words were clearly not enough to stop the shrinking of a deeply flawed national economic system.
Okay, so Herbert Hoover, the president at the time, did step in, made some speeches, tried to react in order to save things from getting worse and to help boost the economy back up. But by and large, historians look at Herbert Hoover as not doing a very good job. He did not save the day at this economic crash, this crisis that the country was facing. Tolulope, could you read paragraph 6?
Yes. The stock market crash had many short-term consequences. Banks that improvidently lent money to future traders to buy stock on margin found that many of those loans would go unpaid. Consequently, a rash of bank failures swept the nation. This had a tremendous ripple effect on the economy. If a working-class family was unfortunate to have their savings held in a trust by a failed bank, too bad for them, all their money was lost.
Thank you. So yeah, banks are a business. We don't really think of it that way, but a bank, when you pick a bank and you make, you set up a savings account or a checking account, or you get a mortgage for your home through a bank, it's a business. When that business fails, then you may have thought you had all your money saved at that bank, but really it's, money is a strange thing. Money, especially when you save it in a bank, your money doesn't exist. They're not sitting there with a pile of money with your name on it, right? It's an agreement between you and the bank that when I come and ask for my $5,000 back, you're going to give it to me. That's the agreement when you stick your money in the bank. And at that time, there was no guarantee that that was necessarily true. And so the banks across the country, many banks that regular people invested their money in, had that savings account, that checking account. The banks were failing. It's just a business. And so that bank fails, and then all your money that you thought you had saved there is gone. So I mean, picture your family, right? And we're all in different situations here across the state of Pennsylvania. Picture what it would be like if all the money that you have in the bank, or also what happens is banks were, as that bank is failing, it's going back to all the people that it has lent money to and say, hey, we need that money right now. We lent you $10,000 to buy stock, or we lent you $50,000 to buy a house. We need that money today. That's a crisis for the country and for a lot of individuals.
Actually, this happened to the Soviet Union when it got apart in 1990. So most people there lost all their money, and it was really bad situation.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting at that time with the Soviet collapse, I guess, huh? The banking.
Yeah, because people invested their money to the Bank of the Soviet Union, and when the country just crashed, and all small, like you said, states got apart, and they created their own banks, and no one wanted to return people's money, so people just lost everything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. And these things can be caused by lots of different things. Certainly, when there's something like the collapse of the Soviet Union, that's a major cultural. I mean, everything in society must have been just shaken, including the banks and the money that you have saved in the bank. Yeah. Hmm. Jasmine, could you read paragraph 7?
Sure. As Americans saw banks close and savings disappear, less money was spent on goods and services. Many consumers who had bought the new conveniences of the Golden Twenties on the installment plan were unable to make their payments. Businesses began to lay off workers to offset new losses. Many manufacturers had overproduced and created huge inventories.
Okay. Could you continue to read paragraph 8?
Sure. Unemployment brought even less savings and spending, and the economy slowed yet another notch. The downward spiral continued into 1933. The 87 billion 1929 New York Stock Exchange was worth a mere 15 billion in 1932. Unemployment rose from 1.5 million Americans in 1929 to a debilitating 12 million in 1932.
Okay, and the next paragraph says it's 25% nationwide unemployment. So unemployment skyrockets, companies are going under. So that means not only, just the whole thing, it says, as that paragraph says, it downward spiral. The problem is getting worse and worse and worse. Everything's connected. The money that you have in the banks disappears. Not only that, but so now you don't have money, right? Your family has much less money than it previously did, which means you can't go to the store and buy things. You're not going to buy that car that you thought you were going to buy. You're spending much less money. Well, if everybody in the country's spending much less money, then let's just pick something, the shoe factory, let's say nobody's going to buy extra new shoes this year. Well, the shoe factory that you work at doesn't need to make as many shoes because now everybody's poor and nobody's buying shoes. And so they close down that shoe factory. So now you've lost all your money, and so now you can't, and you don't go buy anything because you're too poor. And now your company that you work for has gone out of business. So everything, it is spiraling out of control. Um, Amy Lynn, could you read paragraph 9 for us about the unemployment?
Okay. Despair swept the nation, and in addition to the nationwide 25% unemployment rate, many laborers were forced to choose between wage cuts and a pink slip. Those people who retained their jobs saw their income shrink by a third. Soup kitchens and charity lines, previously unknown to the middle class, were unable to meet the growing demand for food.
Okay, and if you are familiar with the Great Depression, you probably picture in your head a black and white picture of people standing in line for a soup kitchen or some sort of bread lines or charity. No, it says people had to choose between wage cuts and a pink slip. What do we mean, a pink slip?
It's usually
You
what
get
you
fired.
receive
Yeah, when you
when
get
you're
fired.
fired or let go.
You know, I don't know that it's very true today, but you know, back in the day, they used to fire you with, you know, they would notify you that you were losing your job with a little pink piece of paper. I don't know exactly where that comes from, but that's what that means. A pink slip means you've lost your job. Paragraph 10, it says, desperate for income, thousands performed odd jobs from taking in laundry to collecting and selling apples on the street. College professors in New York City drove taxicabs to make ends meet. Citizens of Washington State lit forest fires in the hopes of earning a few bucks extinguishing them, to be hired, briefly as firefighters. Millions of backyard gardens were cultivated to grow vegetables. Americans prowled landfills waiting for the next load of refuse to arrive in the hopes of finding a few table scraps among the trash. This is 25% unemployment. 1 out of 4 working people in the country has no job. And the people that do have jobs, you know, those jobs aren't that good, right? Wages go down, hours go down. So even if you kept your job, it doesn't mean you're safe. This is a massive, massive nationwide crisis. 11. The strife was, that's a good word, the strife. The strife was uneven across the land. Oklahoma was particularly hard hit as a drought. Those are two tough words together. As a drought brought dry winds, kicking up a dust bowl that forced thousands to migrate westward. African Americans endured unemployment rates of nearly twice the white communities, as African American workers were often the last hired and the first fired. Mexican Americans in California were offered free one-way trips back to Mexico to decrease job competition in the state. The Latino population of the American Southwest sharply decreased throughout the decade as ethnic violence increased. As the days and weeks of the Great Depression turned into months and years, Americans began to organize their discontent. And that leads into the next section. You know, this is from the online textbook ushistory.org. And so the next page is about people's protesting, because President Hoover was really doing a crappy job of responding to the crisis. And so people were protesting a lot. The Dust Bowl has anybody ever heard of the Dust Bowl period?
I have not.
No.
No.
It was the same period during the 1930s. un Not unrelated, but certainly not caused by the Great Depression, but at the same time was several years in the 1930s of very dry drought conditions in the American Midwest, that the middle of the country. And so the top, what happens is when it's super dry, the topsoil where you would, the dirt that you use to plant your crops was so dry that these big winds, these windstorms would come and blow away all your topsoil. Like the nice soil that you use to plant crops would just blow away. And so like down to, so they're in Kansas and Oklahoma and the Dakotas and the middle of the country, What used to be beautiful farmland, if say you're a farmer, your 100 acres of beautiful farmland a few years ago is now just barren, unplantable, totally useless land. You can't blame anybody for it. It's just nature, but it just happened to happen at this exact same time, which just makes things even worse. So the Dust Bowl is happening, the Dust Bowl period is happening at the same time as the Great Depression. And that's where you get this picture, this famous picture of this woman and her children. I forget, I probably should have a caption under there from where I found it, but this is a famous picture. This is a migrant woman who travels around that western half of the country, finding work when she can during the Dust Bowl. Obviously, their clothes are filthy. There's other pictures from this photographer that day, and it's, they're living in a little shack out on the prairie. So the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression are happening at the same time. Agriculture, farming was very hard hit. Because this is the 1930s. The 19 teens was, 14 to 1919 or so was World War I. Well, during World War I, even though America got into World War I very late, we weren't in it the whole time. But during a war, you're going to be producing a lot of everything, including crops and food. And so the farming in America had really been built up, had sort of ballooned during the 19 teens and 1920s. And the farms were much bigger than probably what they needed to be. Well, now the stock market crashes, people are buying less food, they can't buy as much. Then you have the Dust Bowl. And so you have these giant farms that are now A, not needed because people aren't buying as much, or B, the dry drought conditions have ruined a lot of farmland. So agriculture, farmers were hit very hard during the Great Depression. It lasts all the way through the 1930s and really doesn't come to an end until the economy started booming again because of World War II when it happens in the early 1940s. So really the 1930s, the whole decade, was the Great Depression. Any questions about any of that?
No, thank you.
Okay. Well, maybe we're done a little bit early today. But I like this kind of idea that we can talk a little bit about economics and history. I was thinking maybe next week or sometime soon we could talk about prohibition in the 1920s. Does anybody know what prohibition is?
No.
Was that during
Isn't that when they
alcohol?
no alcohol?
Yeah, they prohibited, you prohibit something, you make it, you can't do it. Prohibition was the prohibition of alcohol. So yeah, maybe we could take a crack at that in the future. They passed an amendment, I think the 18th Amendment, an amendment to the Constitution, which is not easy. So this would be backtracking here from the Great Depression. But in the 1920s, they passed an amendment making the manufacture, sale, and consumption of alcohol illegal. So then you have the Prohibition era through the 1920s, and then they passed another constitutional amendment making it legal again, reversing that decision from the earlier amendment. It lasted most of the 1920s. Now, It doesn't mean people stopped drinking alcohol. It meant that drinking alcohol was illegal, so people started to do it, in those
At
back rooms
home.
illegally. Yeah.
We call this law, like we had the same situation that's in the Soviet Union, and we call this law like dry law.
Yeah, yeah, dry. Yeah, anytime alcohol is outlawed, it's called, being dry. And sometimes even towns today, there's towns that are dry towns. I think there's towns that just have, just within that town in America today, have outlawed alcohol. So there's no bars, there's no liquor stores. I think that
Oh,
happened.
I have not heard about these cities. Do we have anything like now?
Well, I'm not sure. I know sometimes you hear about um, college campuses being a dry campus,
Oh,
where the college does not, even if you're over 21 and you can legally drink alcohol, they do not permit alcohol on campus. That's called being a dry campus. So yeah, maybe we could look at the Great Depression and we could use that to look at or not the Great Depression. We could look at prohibition in the 1920s, and we could look at amendments and how you pass an amendment, because that's what it was. It was a constitutional amendment, which is pretty much as big of a law as you can get. The Constitution is the biggest one, and so when you amend the Constitution, that's just as important. That's of equal power as the original Constitution written in 1787. So constitutional amendments are a big deal. Maybe we could talk about those in the future. Okay. Any other questions?
no, thank you.
Okay. Well, I will email out this reading. I have everybody's email, I know. I'll email this out and the link to this video in case you want to rewatch it. And I'll send you the link to the short video that we watched, and you can watch that on your own on YouTube. But yeah, thank you for logging in, everybody.
Thank you
Thank
for the
you.
chat.
Thank you.
All right.
Have
Have a
a good
super
day,
day.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.